The school bus in 5th grade is where I first learned the fundamentals of human reproduction. In a fading era when most parents and all schools taught their baby boom spawn absolutely nothing about sex. The initial introduction came in the form of perverse insults that I eventually figured out were somehow sexual in nature. Calling each other dickheads and pricks, that came easy, felt natural. But that soon escalated to calling your antagonists cocksuckers, or yelling at them to suck my dick. This particular retort took some time to incorporate into my evolving lexicon, primarily because as a literal 10-year-old, it was not immediately clear which would be worse, someone putting their dick in your mouth or you putting your dick in theirs. Either one seemed like a really horrible idea. I preferred to stick with the more ambiguous and less visually disturbing fuck you. In fact, I actually mastered the word fuck in all of its usable forms and context before understanding what it primarily meant as a verb. That came a few months later. Following the afternoon bus ride, I had a 30-minute walk alone down Sherman Hollow Road, which gave me time to rewind through all the significant social interactions and blunders of the day, or to spool off into my imagination for high adventure. And occasionally, my oldest brother Chip would come by. Chip was a senior in high school and drove a '63 Valiant, the color of dried Pepto-Bismol. And he had a girlfriend, Sheila Auclair. When Sheila was in the car, she always made him pick me up. Otherwise, he would just cruise by with a taunting wave or do that trick of stopping 50 feet beyond me, then driving away just as I reached the car. I fell for this way more times than I should have. But Sheila liked me, and to be honest, I had a huge crush on Sheila. She was the oldest of 3 sisters and 2 brothers, my friends Tim and Gary, cutting-edge obscenity slingers on the bus. The 7 Auclairs somehow lived in a small 3-bedroom, 1-bath house down on the Pond Road, about a dozen bus stops away. Sheila was pretty. She had brown hair and blue eyes with freckles lightly dusted on her cheeks and down her tan arms, always chewing gum behind a smile that never failed to make me smile back. When Chip and Sheila weren't parked somewhere making out in the Valiant, they made out on the couch in our basement den. That is, if my parents weren't home. I knew this because I snuck a glance through the window a couple of times. But for the most part, I was more interested in watching TV upstairs. One night after dinner, my mom told me to get my homework and go over to the neighbors. This was weird. It had never happened before. When I asked why, she said people were coming over for an important meeting. My other brother, Woody, was conveniently spending the night at a friend's house, and I had to be out of the house, too. By the time I came down from my room with my stuff, there was Sheila and her parents sitting on our couch, my dad sitting upright and uncomfortably in the Barcalounger, Chip on the other couch, and my mom bringing in coffee and sodas on a tray. No one was smiling. Sheila nervously glanced at me for a brief second, then quickly turned away. And nobody said anything as I walked to the back door, put on my coat and boots, grabbed a big flashlight, and trudged over to the Morses. In the pre-Roe v. Wade days of 1971, the viable options for a pregnant high school girl in Hinesburg, Vermont were option 1. Marry your boyfriend in the town hall, live together at one of your parents' house, and after graduation, your husband gets an unskilled labor job, and you save up until you can rent a double wide at the Mountain View Trailer Park. And 2, adoption. There may have been other options, but these were the only 2 that were on the table. Mr. Auclair was a journeyman carpenter, severely weathered, perpetually hungover. Mrs. Auclair, a really nice lady with debilitating scoliosis, who was rarely seen standing, but she did love kids. And the Auclairs were unwavering proponents of option 1. That is, after all, how they started their family. My physicist father and librarian mother were much more prudent and pragmatic. Nixon Republicans to this day There is no reason to ever get emotional in a crisis. You follow the proper procedures, you do the math, you solve for why, and you move forward. And they somehow prevailed in the negotiations that went on through a handful of meetings. I found out about Sheila being pregnant when some kids on the bus started ridiculing her brothers about it. The baby was born via C-section that June, and after being held by Sheila for a few minutes, whisked away into a closed adoption. No one in my family ever mentioned the episode again. Chip and Sheila's relationship didn't fare well during the final months before the birth, and even worse the month after. Their friends and their friends' parents were all firmly in the option one camp. You do right by your girl. Babies are a gift from God. He could have gotten a job at the GE plant or the cheese factory in Moncton. They pay good. A month after graduation, Chip enlisted in the Navy and left Vermont, running away to find a new life, or at 18, a life. After the Navy, he settled in South Carolina, never returning to Vermont or to Sheila. 2 decades later, I sat in my office in San Diego in my early 30s. Intra-office email had just morphed into this mind-boggling new thing called the World Wide Web. A procrastinator's wet dream. Home pages, news groups, Netscape, and of course, classmates.com. Having left Vermont myself after college a dozen years before, I registered on classmates.com and cryptically embedded my email into my free profile, which is against the rules. A few weeks later, I started an email exchange with Suzanne Stevens, who just happened to be the sister of the first girl I made out with in high school. But unlike my brother, I was consistently thrown out trying to get to third base until my freshman year in college, where liberal arts majors could apparently minor in casual sex, and birth control was easier to get him than pizza. During some back and forth emails with Suzanne to catch up on various people and gossip, I got a follow-up from her that opened with, "Did you know Linda Auclair's sister Sheila?" In my head, I'd already started to draft my response before I read the very next line, which said she had been living with a junkie in Rutland for years and had just died of AIDS. I sat in front of my monitor, remembering that scared 17-year-old on my parents' couch. I remembered those big smiling blue eyes, that sweet face talking to me over the front seat of Chip's Valiant. I remembered seeing her pregnant, sitting in the Auclair's front porch with her mom, both waving at the school bus as we pulled away, our obnoxious cheers pouring out the window at her brothers who were laughing and flipping us off in return. I wrote Suzanne back. Yeah, I remember her. She was my brother's girlfriend for a while. That's really sad. I'm certain Suzanne knew the gory details and was really fishing for a much more juicy response than that, but I had nothing. A few weeks later, I was on the phone with my brother Chip. We call each other on birthdays and major holidays, as brothers do. Breaking the 25-year-old family taboo, I told him what Suzanne told me about Sheila. The phone went silent for a really long pause. He's not much for showing emotion. It's a family trait. Whoa, that's really sad. He finally said that. Another pause and an exhale. We were pretty wild kids in high school. I guess she just never figured things out, never got a break. It was my turn to be silent. I sat on my end of the phone, assessing his dispassionate response. Then he said, "You know, I have never been as crazy in love with any other woman as I was with her." Bam. A single tear of humanity had just leaked through the phone in a revealing confession from a guy who has had several long-term relationships and was in his second marriage. He went on to tell me all the spotty details of the story I've just told you, and that running away to the Navy was both the easiest and hardest decision he ever made. After the phone call, Sheila was returned to the vault of unspoken family topics. And this latest information about her wasn't shared with anyone else in the family as far as I know. I certainly wasn't going to casually bring it up at Thanksgiving or anything. Another 2 decades passed until just a few years ago. I was visiting my parents, now in their 80s, doing well, living in Central Coast, California. My brother Woody's son had called them to let them know that he and his wife were expecting their first child, my parents' first great-grandchild. My dad recited the same thesis he delivers every time anyone in the family is expecting a baby. It's going to be a boy. 5 generations of Lambert men, and we have always had boys. He follows this with a brief but technically incorrect explanation of X and Y chromosomes. Oh, come on, Lou, my mom says. You have an aunt. You have a sister. And Chip had a daughter with Carolyn. My mom rarely calls bullshit on my dad, but nobody gets to fuck with the genealogy. She's a platinum member of Ancestry.com. She's been working for years, charting her family and my father's family back to the frickin' Magna Carta. But he is mostly right. 5 generations of Lambert testicles have produced 16 boys and 3 girls, most of whom are displayed in the small herd of framed photographs on my mom's piano. Since I was 2 martinis in, I decided to spontaneously engage in a little parental experimentation. I recklessly yanked the hitherto unmentioned family skeleton out of the closet after 45 years. What did Sheila have? I asked. My dad either didn't hear me or pretended not to hear me. Those 2 responses have become completely indistinguishable after 2 decades of increasingly ineffectual hearing aids. But my mom sat there for a few seconds and teared up before she quietly said, she had a boy. Thank you.
Eber Lambert, everybody. Give him a hand.